Hello, welcome to Chapter 2. We're going to begin this study today by looking at what families are like in today's current society and how we can begin to relate to them. I certainly encourage you to look at these preview questions and thinking about what are the characteristics in contemporary society that will affect families. How can you consider both those positive and negative aspects of those characteristics? And ultimately, our task is to decide how do those factors in today's world affect our ability to work with families. Now, I'm going to encourage you, and I'm looking down at my notes, I'm going to encourage you to do the little activity called Family Images for Chapter 2. It's in your textbook, and it's also linked inside just below the PowerPoints. And the questions have you draw 4 different pictures, drawing the family you lived in as a child, drawing the family you lived in as a teenager, drawing the family you live in presently, and then your ideal family. Now, certainly then the questions call you to share those with other classmates, but certainly you could talk with these pictures with other family members or with people that you know. And thinking about those, then you want to think about which families are you most comfortable working with? Families that are similar to yours, families that are different, and kind of to use this as a jump start of where we're headed into working with diverse families. So what defines a family? Well, your textbook does a great deal of talking about what is the ideal family, and the ideal family is influenced by many different things. Obviously, our cultural images influence the ideal family. If we were to hop back 75 or 80 years ago, the ideal family probably contained a mom, a dad, 4 or 5 kids. If we were to hop back only about 30 or 40 years ago, a mom, dad, and maybe 2 children. But we know today the ideal family for many people may be just a mom and some kids, or a grandma and a grandpa raising grandchildren. So the ideal family can be many different things. Ultimately, you're going to want to look in your textbook to where it talks about these diverse family structures and looking at how those different structures will influence the families that you work with. Typically, we consider to define a family as a group of people who are intimate with each other, who are interdependent, meaning they can function on their own, but also they rely on each other to help meet shared goals. Also, we would define a family as being a group of people who have a commitment and a responsibility to each other. Now, obviously, a family can mean many different things to many different people. A child who lives in a foster family has a family, and that may include their foster family, but it may also include the family that is their home family, the family that they miss, and this certainly will affect your classroom. Look at this picture, and I'm sorry, let me see if I can move my little picture over a little bit. You will see in this picture that families come in all shapes and sizes. In this picture here, you see what looks like maybe a dad or an older brother with 4 younger children. This certainly is a family. In this middle picture, you'll see what looks like a mom and perhaps 2 children. This picture maybe is dad, might be grandpa or an uncle raising a young girl. We know that many children we work with have families that include mom and themselves, and that was my family as a young child after my parents divorced. You'll notice in this family here at the bottom, we have happy dad and 2 happy kids all stacked up in a dog pile. And here's what is considered to be by many your ideal or your traditional family, but we know really there's no ideal or no traditional anymore. Families come in all shapes and sizes, and so we want to think about that and consider that as we look at this chapter. In this chapter, I'm going to also encourage you to do some of the extra essay questions. I'm going to turn in my notebook. If you look at some of the essay questions that are linked below the PowerPoint, you'll see that there's one about a caregiver named Mary Howard, as described in Chapter 2. There's also one about Sam Butler and his dad, who comes to visit you. You can choose to do either of those 2 short essay questions, answer the questions, and email them to me for extra credit. I love to hide extra credit inside the course. So feel free to do either of those essay questions. email them to me, and those will be great for extra credit thought. So here we're going to pick up again in looking at what do some strong families have in common. First of all, strong families have in common a commitment to help each other through daily life, to help each other to be successful, and to achieve the task and the dreams and the hopes they have for each other. Strong families also communicate to each other. It's a sign of strength in a family when a child knows that they can talk to their loved ones and their loved ones spend time talking with them. Coping with change. We know that none of us are without changes or diversity or difficulties in our families, but how we cope with them is a sign of being a strong family, especially when we cope well and we've developed coping strategies to use as a family to help those in our care. We also know that strong families tend to have a sense of spirituality. They tend to have family and community ties. We know that it's really hard in today's society when families move from place to place, that often children are far away from any extended family. That doesn't mean they're not strong families, but it is more important for them, if they don't have family ties nearby, to make community ties. And lastly, you'll see that clear roles are important in strong families. Strong families know this is the person who does this. This is the person in our family who takes care of these things. This is the person in the family I go to when I need whatever it is. Strong families tend to have very clear roles that are easily defined, and children are very confident in who has what role. Now, I want you to think about this. I'm sorry, my asthma and my allergies are bothering me. What is your definition of family? I want you to think. What is it? Does it encompass all the family introduced in this chapter? As you read about the different families, you probably read about grandmas and grandpas raising children, single parents, teen parents, two dads, two moms. There are lots of different diverse families that we'll be working with. And if your definition doesn't include all of these families that we talked about in this chapter, how would you prepare yourself to work with all families? What do you have to think about further? Are there some of these families that you know up front may or may not meet your definition of family? They could be. But certainly as a teacher, it is our job to work with all families and with all children. And if we want to strengthen that home, school, and community bond, we must meet and work with all families. So I encourage you to stop and think about it now, but also go back and think about it later. We're going to be looking at some of today's demographics, looking at the modern family. We know there's been an increase in marital instability. Only 67% in 2009 were living with two married parents. And we know that that's changed greatly in recent years. It's much more likely to have children in single families, in single parent families, than in the past. I know for myself as a young child, my parents divorced at the end of the 3rd grade. I was one of the only kids in my class for many years that lived with a single parent. Now today that would not seem such an oddity, but at the time it certainly was. What about an increased number in single parents overall? I believe my statistics show between 1970 and 2010, this more than doubled to 1 in 3. This would be what I experienced. The poverty and stress in single-parent homes. It doesn't necessarily mean if you're a single parent that you live in poverty or you have a lot of stress, but we know that we tend to find those things occur together. In today's economy and today's world, it's really hard to live off of one income. And depending on the education level of the single parent, it may affect the job choices, and thus your job choices obviously affect your stress level. Changes in the role behavior for men and women. Particularly for men, there are more that are helping and leading and doing things in the homes that they didn't used to. Remember back in the day when some of you were young children, or even with your grandparents, it was very common for the man to leave the house in the morning, come back at night, prop up his feet, ask for dinner, and relax. We know that today many men now take significant roles in family life, both with helping with the rearing of the children and home duties. We also know there have been great changes for women. Many women in the past would have worked in the home as what I call the home engineer, and they would have spent all of their time working with the home and with the children. But these days, much like myself, they're at work, they're in other places, and certainly need changes within the home environment to be most successful. So we do see that there's many changes in life at home and at work, and certainly mobility has reduced that sense of community and family support. Many families live in isolation from their other family members. We know that in Sampson County we have a large population of migrants, and that means that whole families may be moving from place to place, or it may also mean that a family comes to live in our area to work, leaving family behind in other places, and will soon return to them. But while they're here, there may be a loss of support and community that would be affected and would be felt by the children. Certainly this is true in my case. My husband's family all lives in Nebraska, and we are very far away. And so we know that it can reduce that family support and community. It doesn't have to, but it's going to take extra work on our modern families to build those community supports. We also know that modern families are much smaller. It's very common for me to have students share on the first day of class that they have siblings, 2, 3. I've even had students share, especially some of my older students, share that they came from families of 8, 9, 10. In today's modern family, it's very common to have children who are only children, and maybe just 2 or 3 children in the home. This does affect the family as a whole, and ultimately will affect the child in your care. Social change. You'll read in your book about how just family life in general has changed socially. Families are very busy. They do a lot of different things than they did in the past. We also have noticed that we've moved to a more child-centered society, where families revolve their whole life around what their children do. On this night, we do this, and on Tuesday night, we do this. With our children, it's much more of a child focus than an adult focused society in the past. And lastly, look at this. Stress of modern life. Overcommitment at home and at work. Many children that I've worked with in recent years, we know that children feel the stress of modern life. They're overcommitted. They play in 2 or 3 recreation sports. They go to school. They go to church. They go to scouts. They play outside with friends. They have play groups. They have play dates. And before we know it, not only are parents feeling the stress, but children feel that same stress. And so just modern life in general, the go, go, go of everything, does allow for overcommitment and ultimately brings us back to that stress level. Well, I'm going to encourage you to revisit some of these effects. Look at these effects on the adults and children. Think about marriage instability and the rise in single-parent families. When I first started teaching, what feels like forever ago, in my little first grade class, I believe I had 1 child who lived in a single-parent home. I had 1 child who lived in a home where the parents were not together regularly, and about everybody else in the class all had 2 families, 2 parents, and had family nearby. Certainly this would not be the case in today's classroom situation, and these do have effects both on the children and on the adults. Think about those changes in expectations, especially for males and females, and how that affects life. Think also about the stress. Look at the stress level and the rate of social change. How do all these factors affect your relationships with families?